Our friend Alex Epstein, who wrote the great book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, he says don't call them renewables and non-renewables. That's not the proper categories. He said use the word reliables and unreliables. And I think that's really spot on. Nuclear power, coal, natural gas, you can rely on them. As you just pointed out, they are the panic button for California. You can't rely on wind when it's either too windy or not windy enough. You can't rely on solar in the night. And even if you could, both are so much more expensive, you'd have the kind of energy poverty you're seeing in Europe. All I see in the media party, in the mainstream media, is climate change is to blame. Climate change, it did not shut down reliables. Politicians did. I feel like this is a disaster at the hands of politicians, but they're trying to blame, like the Aztecs, trying to blame some, solar eclipse or something for their own acts.
Well, the funny thing about that is even if you assume that climate change is happening, turning off nuclear power plants is the worst way to deal with it, right? Because you've got nuclear energy for zero emissions. So we disconnected the San Onofre nuclear plant several years ago. That was supplying 9% of the state's energy needs, and I think 17% of the needs for Southern California. That's gone. They were about to turn off the Diablo Canyon nuclear reactor, the last one in the state, and then Gavin Newsom waded in and told the legislature to delay 5 years. That passed last week on the verge of this crisis. So we're going to still have one nuclear power plant, but you're right, as reliables turn off, you start to see the deficiencies in renewables. And 2 years ago, exactly this time of year, we had a very similar energy crisis. And Gavin Newsom told California consumers we needed to sober up about the limits of solar and wind because they don't work when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, or as you put it as well, blowing too hard, right, for the turbines to work. And yet then just a few weeks later, he announced this mandate for everybody to buy electric vehicles. So people are scratching their heads here, even on the left, and wondering why we are requiring people to buy electric vehicles that we're then telling them they cannot charge in a crisis between the hours of 4 and 9 p.m. Does not make sense. Yeah. You're stuck with luck.
It's crazy. And of course, I don't know if you saw that Xcel Energy in Colorado turned off the thermostats in 22,000 of their customers' homes. Now, those people had agreed to it for a reduction in price. So basically, the poorest people in Colorado who needed that $25 discount or whatever, well, they can bake in the summer heat while wealthy people can get their air conditioning. I had a premonition of many things to come, climate lockdowns. I mean, we see in Europe them talking about mandatory reductions in energy use, not voluntary. I'm terrified by it. But I want to ask you, there's a lot to talk about there, but I know we only have you for a couple more minutes. So let me shift gears to what I think was an absolutely astonishing moment in American political history. And it was this speech by Joe Biden. And it's not just the speech. It was the staging, the setting, the color, the iconography. It felt like it was a satire. It felt like, I'm just going to say it, it felt like Nazi iconography, Nazi color, blood red, black, armed soldiers in the background. It felt like a parody of a Hitler speech. And I'm not comparing Biden to Hitler. I'm just saying visually it was something that Leni Riefenstahl would have set up. Here, take a quick look at that speech.
And here, in my view, is what is true. MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election. And they're working right now, as I speak, in state after state, to give power to decide elections in America to partisans and cronies, empowering election deniers to undermine democracy itself. MAGA forces are determined to take this country backwards to an America where there is no right to choose, no right to privacy, no right to contraception, no right to marry who you love. They promote authoritarian leaders and they fan the flames of political violence that are a threat to our personal rights, to the pursuit of justice, to the rule of law, to the very soul of this country.
He was angry. He called his opponents, he implied they were fascists. He denounced any MAGA Republicans, which was, any one of the millions of people who voted for Trump. He said they were a threat to democracy. It was a fascist speech in a fascist setting. What on earth happened, Joel? What was that all about? Did he know he was doing it? Who approved that? What was the point of that?
So I think it is a deliberate attempt to make the election about Trump and to rally the Democratic base to come out against Trump, to frighten them into thinking that if they give congressional power back to Republicans in the midterm elections this year, that means bringing back the evil, bad orange man. So I think that's very much what they were aiming to do. As for the staging of it, I think they hoped that Independence Hall would provide a patriotic setting. They would allow Biden to champion or posture as the champion of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, both of which were drafted there. But, I think that the people in the Biden administration just are at a certain level incompetent. They did not know how to stage that speech properly. If you saw a wide-angle view of the speech, it looked less ominous. So they probably looked at pictures of Independence Hall and thought, oh, that looks great, red, white, and blue. They didn't realize that when the camera panned in, when it zoomed in on Biden, all you would see is the red. Likewise, they thought that having Marines behind the president would emphasize the patriotism of the location. Instead, it looked like they were Imperial Guards from the Death Star in Star Wars. It looked really bad. Plus, it was a disgrace for the Marines to have to be exploited that way in a political speech. So I think there was some incompetent staging. You never would have seen that at the Trump White House because, say what you will about his tweets, he had a definite feel for stagecraft, having come from the entertainment industry, the real estate world. So he understood how to stage a speech. And I think the staging was the greatest failure. It really made many Americans feel like Joe Biden is actually scarier than Donald Trump, which is quite something because Joe Biden's excuse, or the excuse made for him, has always been that he's mentally incapable of being malicious. But that speech was really scary, and the fact that he was labeling Trump supporters as you put it, fascists, the word semi doesn't really change the word fascist. That's really scared people. So I think it backfired. I think Democrats know it backfired, and Biden has spent the last several days trying to backtrack from some of the things he said. No, he wasn't talking about all Trump supporters, just the elected ones. Well, who elects them? I mean, who elects the quote-unquote MAGA Republicans? Besides which, Trump's defense here has been basically to catch the Democrats as hypocrites. I mean, Peter Doocy of Fox News put it to Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre that she had called an election stolen on several occasions, 2016, 2018. So if that's extremist, isn't she an extremist? And her answer for that was just terrible. So I think the Democrats really shot themselves in the foot here, and they've given Trump voters a reason to come out to the polls in November.
What you just saw was an excerpt from my nightly show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every weekday, I do a monologue. Usually it's about half an hour. Then I interview an interesting guest, and then we read my hate mail or my fan mail, whichever is more fun. It's only available behind a paywall, though. That's how we pay our bills here at Rebel News. We don't take a dime from Justin Trudeau. But the good news is it's only $8 a month, about half the price of Netflix. And in addition to my nightly show, you also get weekly shows from 4 other friends here at Rebel News. So you're getting 36 shows a month just for $8. I think it's worth it. And even if you're not quite sure, do it anyways, because we rely on viewers like you to keep us free and independent. I promise you I'll never take a dime from Trudeau. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com and click subscribe. Thanks.